Hi, Stefan the BMW DIY guy. My project today is a full brake pad and rotor replacement from R1 Concepts. Now, if I can do a maintenance project and an upgrade project at the same time, that makes me really happy because it's like you get double the amount of benefit from the same amount of work. So that is a great thing. I am really excited to get this into my car. So I have the M Sport package on my BMW F32, and those are the blank rotors. And I'm also looking at about 66,000 miles on my brake pad, so I'm definitely due. I'm not in an unsafe place yet, but it's not gonna hurt to replace them. If I'm gonna replace my rotors, I'm definitely gonna replace my brake pads at the same time. Now, R1 Concepts makes an absolutely fantastic both drilled and slotted rotors that I'm gonna change on my F32 front and rear. Now with my M Sport brakes, I have the Brembo style front and the standard style back. So they're a little bit different. Depending on your setup, you can either have the M Performance, which are the Brembo kind of big caliper style, both on front and rear, the M Sport, which is Brembo fronts and standard backs, or standard brakes, which are the rear style is the same on both front and rear. So this really is going to work regardless of what style you have, because you can just use the fronts or the rears or both, you know, for the instructions on how to do this upgrade yourself. So I am really excited to get this done. Please click subscribe and the little alarm bell next to the video. I have all kinds of projects that are in the works, and as always, I'll have all of the information, torque values, and tools that you need listed in the description below. So with all of that, let's get out to the car and get started. All right, y'all, here we are out in the garage. Obviously, I've got the car up in the air already and have the tires off. So let's talk about that really quickly. You know, whenever I've got the car in the air, I'm always going to give the same advice because I don't assume that this is something you've done a lot of, so I want to make sure that you're careful. I am fortunate enough to have quick jacks. Check them out. They're really great tools. They're not a small investment, but in my opinion, absolutely worth it if you have your car up in the air with any sort of regularity. If you are using a jack and jack stand, this can be done one tire at a time without any problem whatsoever. I've got the luxury of being able to do the car in the air completely, do all four. It makes it a little bit easier. But if you're using jacks and jack stands, do not trust your life to a jack. Do not jack up your car right here and then start getting in it and around it and underneath it with just a jack holding it in the air. Make the small investment in a good set of jack stands and make sure that you're safe while you're doing this work. So the other trick is loosen your lug nuts while it's still on the ground. You can use a breaker bar and a 17mm socket to break your lugs free, and then you can use an impact wrench or a socket wrench to get them off once they're in the air. If you have a tire that's stuck, and mine like to stick, it'll be interesting to see what happens once I've got the new rotors on, if it sticks. Just kind of turn backwards and with a shoe on, kick at your tire just to kind of bang on it, and it'll break free of the hub and it will come off. So I have all four off at this point. Like I said, you can do this one at a time, and really trying to get set up for success here. Got all my tools laid out and we're gonna walk through this. So one of the very first things we're gonna do is I've got this upper cover off. I've got this set off to the side right here. These are 10mm plastic nuts up here on the upper corners that you just kind of quarter turn and then it'll come loose. This is your brake fluid reservoir. What you're gonna do is you're gonna wanna loosen this and then just set the cap back on top so nothing will fall in. Because what we're gonna have to do is we're putting in new brake pads. So we're gonna have to compress where the piston sits, because the new brake pads are gonna be thicker than the old. So we're gonna have to compress that piston, and being able to release the pressure on that reservoir helps you compress that piston back a little more easily. And we're gonna use the C-clamp to do it, and I'll show you, but it's not all that hard. All right. So with all of that prep said, the very first thing you're gonna have to do is get your rotor off. And your rotor's held on at the rear, and I'm gonna change my camera angle here in a second, get some light and change my camera angle. There are two big 18mm bolts on the back of this. They're a little bit hard to get to and a little bit hard to see, but I'm gonna show you. I've got to get some light set up so you can see it because it's behind, but I'll get that set, and you can use a socket and a wrench, or you can use an 18mm wrench, which I found a ratcheting wrench, which in my case worked pretty well. These are pretty tight bolts, I'll show you. All right, let me get in here. I'm gonna move slowly, so hopefully won't get too much camera motion here. All right, so as we look, you can see there, right there, is the top 18mm bolt. And there's a matching one at the bottom. They're a little bit hard to break open. Now, If you're in a part of the country that has salt on the roads or has bad winters, those bolts can be pretty nasty. So in my case, what I'm able to do, let me come back here and I'm going to try to do this here with one hand at a time, right? Is I was able to get my 18 millimeter wrench on here. So I turned it the wrong direction right at the moment. There you go. I was able to get my 18 millimeter wrench on here, get it set up, and then pull downward. And I really had to brace really hard to get that to break free. Now I've broken free the bolt already a little bit. The lower one tends to be a little bit easier because you can get a lower angle on it that's away from the body and press down. You can also do the same if you have a short breaker bar or a long handled socket wrench that can handle that much torque. If need be, you can hit it with a little WD-40 or a little PB blaster, let it soak in to help break those free because they can be a little nasty. So back those two bolts out, then we're going to take the rotor off and hang the rotor. So I'm actually going to just get a metal hanger so I can hang it off the spring of my suspension right there. So we're going to do that next. Before we take the rotor off, one of the very first things we want to do is the brake wear sensor. We're going to replace the brake wear sensors as well. You don't always have to, but it's not a bad idea. They're not expensive. So I've reused them before. In this case, I'm using new ones. So, and again, we're on the driver's side. So we open this, because the brake wear sensors are only on one side, front and rear. So you open the little door on this box. Your brake wear sensor is this right-hand plug. So you just take it and pull it out of that box connection. And then this is your typical little depression tab that you're going to press down on, and then it'll come apart and it'll separate. And then you can walk it out of these clips as well, that it's sitting in here and here. So now this is free and the brake rotor can come away. So what I need to do now is I'm going to take these 18 millimeter bolts out, and then I've just taken a hanger and I've just bent the hanger because I'm going to hang it up off the spring. So I'm going to hook this bent hanger through the rotor and then hang it up off of my suspension spring, because what you don't want it to do is have it be hanging on your brake lines. I might do braided steel brake lines one of these days, but I still have the original OEM, so you don't want it hanging on that rubber. So just back these out, and right now I've still got both of my 18 millimeter bolts in, so I need to take both of those out. So let me get those out, and then I'm going to show you taking this off and hanging your rotor. Okay, so before we take the brake caliper off, I want to show one thing, and also before you take those 18 millimeter bolts out and loosen it up completely, there's one thing you can do that's easier to do while it's still in place. So these Brembo style calipers the brake pads can be removed without the caliper itself coming off, especially if you've got the BMW tool that inserts on both sides and presses outward to press the pistons back into place. Now, most of us don't have that, and we have to take the caliper off to press the pistons back. But there is one thing to do that's easier here. So there's pins that hold the spring clip in place. The pins are right here, and it's easier if you just use a punch, and you can use a hammer or a rubber mallet really gently to drive the pins back. So there's a pin here and there's a pin here. It's easier to do that while it's sitting in place and secure, to bang those pins back a little bit, and the pin head is back here and you can slowly work them out. Okay, and that will get the spring clip here up and out of the way, which is what you're going to need to do. But that's something easier to do, like I said, with the caliper in place. So make sure to do that first before you take the caliper off. All right, so both bolts are out. Forgive any background noise. This is fairly heavy and it's squished onto your rotor, right? So you just kind of have to work it and wiggle it off. There we go. So now it's off. So as you can see, that'll give us access to the brake pads. That'll give us access to the brake rotor, everything we need to do. And so then just find a good, convenient place to hook your hanger through here. And like I said, I just bent an old metal hanger to get it to fit in here. And then just hang it off your spring. That way it's not hanging on the hose at all. Okay, so that's good to go. We'll walk through taking the rotor off next. There is a bolt you need to take out right here. It can be, mine's a little rusty. Yours can be as well, again, depending on the weather conditions. I'll show you getting this off and the rotor's gonna come off next. All right, so if you're using this by hand, so this is a 6 millimeter Allen Allen on a socket. Now you can do this with a wrench. Now this is going to want to rotate, so if you do this manually or do this with your breaker bar, get it set inside and then bang up on it to get it to come loose. You have to kind of shock it loose, which will apply more torque on this before it rotates on you. Okay, either that or an impact wrench is really, really nice. I've already broken it free a little bit, but an impact wrench is really, really nice in all of this. And I was able to get my impact on this and just fit it in and back it right out. So as you can see, it's a relatively short little bolt, so make sure that set this aside, set it someplace safe. At this point, your rotor is loose. Now this may be a little stiff to come off. Mine have never come off. I've seen different results with these where they can be, again, depending on the road conditions, they can be a little rusty, they can be a little hard to get off, but it should come off. And I'm just going to work at this because nothing else is holding it on anymore. So with that bolt out. So I'm going to keep working on this and I'll get it off and I'll show you the results of that and what it took to get it off. All right, so the rotor is loose. Let me talk about it really quick because, and again, I'm here in the Pacific Northwest. We don't use salt on the roads. So I'm surprised that it was adhered down as much as it was. It was a little bit difficult, but keep in mind, there's nothing else keeping your rotor on other than that one bolt that I took out. So, I've seen these come off as easily as just pulling that bolt out and just pulling, and it comes clean off. So other times it can be stuck down really significantly. So what I did was, worked at it a little bit. It cleared that it was adhered down really, really well. Actually just got a little WD-40, which, call me strange, I actually kind of like the smell of. Put a little bit of WD-40 all around this inner ring, got WD-40 into all of the bolts, rotated the hub, to try to get it to soak in, pulled, still was stuck a little bit. And then of all things, if you have a rubber mallet, which is a great way to put a little bit of force on things, but not bang them up, especially dealing with metal, right? So you can take a rubber mallet, and I was just kind of hitting around the outsides to just vibrate it, right? To get it to vibrate, and then just bang, it popped loose just like that. So now you can see it lifts. It just lifts clean off just like that. Nice and simple. So you can take this and set it aside. Now the other thing that we have, let me grab the new one here. Let's talk about the new one here really quickly. So as we look at this, so the new one, now there's multiple opinions about which way the vanes can go. So as you look at this, to the left of this image is the front of the car. Again, we're dealing with the driver's side front. So the left is the front, the right is the rear of the car. So the vanes are spinning forward, right? So I read in multiple places, multiple opinions, even including R1. R1 says that the directions of the vanes are a matter of personal preference. You can set them either way. And says that quite openly, that you can set it either way. But in the diagram, they show them rotating forward. So as your wheel is going forward, the vanes are kind of spinning forward. So even though they say that you can do it multiple ways, you can do it in either direction that you would like. In my case, I'm going to go with their diagram that shows you're supposed to put it with the vanes going forward. Okay, so then you can just get it set into place. I'm going to use the bolt to secure it back into place. Now I'm going to get the torque value on this to make sure that it's torqued down the right way. So you can see it rotates this direction. So it's really that simple on how to change these. If your hubs if your rotors are adhered down fairly securely, then this could be a little bit of a challenge, but just make sure you've got some PB blaster, some WD-40, rubber mallet if you need it to just bang on it to get it out. So let me get the correct torque value on this because I always wanted to put things in the correct way. I've done these before where I've just done these snug, just tightened them down snug. But knowing the Germans, they have a torque value for everything, so I'm going to get the torque value for this. Then we're going to show you about taking your brake pads out of the rotor itself and what we're going to do there to get that set up and how to compress the piston in the brake rotor, which we're going to use a C-clamp for. So let me get the torque value for this, and then I'll be right back. We're going to talk about the brake pads. All right, so really quickly, your bolt for holding your rotor on is 16 Newton meters. Yeah, I didn't say nanometers for once, right? So this is going to be interesting because you've got to hold this at the same time, right? But just like that. And 16 is not hard at all. So that's something you can hold the rotor in your hand. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the caliper and show. I'm gonna bring the caliper out a little bit so you can see how you work the brake pads out. It's really not hard, and you know, I was about due for this. When I look at my brake pads, this was a good choice. Plus, the other thing is, if you're changing your rotors, you should be changing your brake pads at the same time. I think I had a little bit less life on my rotors on my brake pads, excuse me, than I realized. So this really is a good and timely change. So let me walk you through that next. It's pretty straightforward and simple. Okay, so I've jumped ahead a little bit because I thought it'd be easier to actually show you with the pieces out rather than kind of in place. So as I mentioned earlier about the pins, right, there are these pins that hold the spring cover in place, and they drive through the spring cover like this. They drive through the holes in the brake pads themselves. So you use your punch and just back these pins out, they'll back out, and you can pull them out the back side, and then the spring cover will come off. Once that's off, your brake pads are essentially just loose, right? So this is the inside brake pad here on the driver's side that's got the brake sensor on it. As you can see, it's still plugged in just like this. Now, what you're gonna wanna do, and as you can see back here, I already have my C-clamp in place. You're gonna wanna do this to both sides. So as I've got my C-clamp here, what I've done is I've put the brake pad in place right here, and I've put the end of my C-clamp on it, and I've cranked my C-clamp down, and that presses the brake pad. It uses the brake pad as the press to press the piston back into place, and you'll want to do it to both sides. I've done it to one side already, and then you'll want to do it to the other as well. And you tighten it down, it's completely tight. So at that point, just back it off, and then your C-clamp will come out, and you can take the brake pad out. See, it comes out like that. And your brake calipers will be pressed back. Now, there's a BMW tool that does both sides at both times. It cranks and cranks outwards. It's got plates. You know, most of us don't have those specialized tools, which is why you can change these brake pads with the caliper in place if you've got that specialized tool, because the specialized tool would slide in between the caliper and the brake pads and would press the pistons back. Well, most of us don't have that. Now, as you can see on one side, I've got the pistons have come back out a little bit. Just a little bit, so I'm gonna redo that side to press it back again. Now again, we're kind of pressing one side, pressing on the other, so you might get a little bit of shift between the two, but you want to get those pressed back because the new brake pads are significantly thicker, as you can see. I mean, you can see the difference there. Like I said, my brake pad wear was actually greater than I realized now that I look at it, so I was about due. I don't have a measuring tape on me to show how many millimeters of brake pad I've got left there, but as you can see, it's a fair amount gone. So these only go in one way. You'll also have your brake pad sensor that clips into the little clip here. So your brake pads are going to go in like this, stacked in like that. And you can also see they say left, right on them. Okay, so they're going to stack in like this. Your brake pad sensor is going to clip into the gap on the back side. So I'm going to press my pistons back here on this side just a little bit further using the original brake pad. And then we're going to look to start to fit all of this stuff back together. And then we're going to be done with one. And we're going to repeat the process on both sides. I'll also show the rears because the rears are a little different too. So the rears are different because they don't have, you know, on my car with the M Sport package, they have the Brembo calipers in the front, the more traditional in the rear. I want to show you the differences between the two because they are fairly significant. All right, so now that the pistons are all pressed back, we've got enough room to put the new pads in. Like I said, the pads are essentially the same. They only kind of go in one direction. They would go in from the top because they have these little feet on them on either side. And then your brake pad sensor is going to go on the inside one, so on the inside of the wheel well. So we'll snap that on in just a minute. Now, the one thing you want to do is clean off the edges of the pistons and all your contact surfaces, which are going to be these inner surfaces here on these inner edges, and your calipers as well. And you want to put a little bit of brake pad grease. So I've got 2 packets of it, and this is just your typical simple brake pad grease. And you really want to put a very light coating on each one of the caliper rings and on the contact surfaces, and then on the back of the brake pads. And you can look at the old ones to see. So if you look, you can see right where those rings come down. So what you want to do is put on a light coating there as well, and a light coating down the outside edges on each side. So when it goes in, so it's nice and lubricated, you don't want to do all this work and have your brakes squeak, right? So, all right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my packet of brake pad grease here, and well, I actually have more like rubber surgical gloves that I'm going to use. And you can use a brush, and if you look at the official BMW TIS guide, they say use a brush, but the container they're coming out of has a little brush on it. So in this case, I'm just going to tear this off and just use my fingertip with a glove, with a different set of gloves, and just very gently trace around the piston rings and down these surfaces on both sides, and then I'm going to put the brake pads in. I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. All right, so I've got a little bit of brake grease on the outside edges and on where the pistons will touch. Same thing, I've lubed up the pistons and the contact points on the inside. I've also put the brake sensor on. This is going to be the pad on the inside. If you notice, one side is flat and one side has a bump. The bump goes to the inside on this side. So, and you can also look at the original that you took out if you have any questions on that as well. So now, with all of that said, you can take your caliper and fit it just in, just like that. And it fits in just nice and neat, just like that, without any problems whatsoever. So then I'm gonna do up the other side, because I still need to put a little bit of, like I said, of pad lube on this and get it all set. I'm gonna slide it into place, and then we're gonna I'll show fitting your caliper back into place. And then we're pretty much done with the front. We just need to secure it down and torque it down with the 218 millimeters on the back, and your front is done. All right, so it came together so quickly, I'm going to show you what I did, because it's really pretty straightforward and simple. So as I was just showing, I greased both pads, the back of both pads, their contact surfaces, the pistons inside the rotor, the contact surfaces there, and then I fit the inside pad first because it's got the brake sensor that we're still going to connect, and we still need to get that done. And then I fit the inside one and kind of jammed my hand into the middle to keep them spread apart. Now, remember the spring clip, right? The spring clip provides tension both outwards and upwards on this pin to help keep the brake pads separated. So what I did is that I took the pin and I pushed it in from this side, right, and put it all the way through until is secure on this side. So not only does it help hold the brake pads in place, because there's holes in each brake pad, but then I took the spring, and because it's got a lip on it on this side, right? It's got a lip right here. So I hooked it under the pin, right? So then with that pin in place, I then kind of pressed the spring down and pushed the pin in from the other side until it came through, and then it could hook up on the spring. So then it was through on both sides. Now make sure that you return the pins back. It's fully flush on the back, and they're all the way in on this side, so they're good and secure. Your brake pads are secure and good to go. Now, the other thing is doing this one at a time. Worst case scenario, you can always go over and look at the other side. Make sure that the positions are the same. It looks the same when you're done. Okay, so once I had the spring clip in and I had all these pins in and secure, I then just fit it onto the brake rotor itself. It's a really tight fit. You kind of got to wiggle and wiggle and wiggle, get it into place until it sandwiches down into the rotor. And then I reached behind, took one of my 18 millimeter bolts, just finger tight in to secure it into place, then put the bottom one in. I'm going to torque it into place in just a minute. But as you can see, it's in place and secure now. So all done. So the new brake rotor's on, the new brake pads are in, and so that's all ready and good to go. All I need to do is torque down the 18 millimeter bolts on the back and move to the back. So I'm going to do the back next. I'm not going to show all four, again, because it's the same process on both sides, with the exception that you don't have a brake sensor on the other side in the front, okay? But I'm going to go do the other back so you can see that, because with the M Sport style brakes, not the M Performance, but the M Sport, I have Brembo style calipers on the front and standard style brake calipers, which are smaller, on the back. And they come apart a little bit differently than these, and they operate a little bit differently. Even the brake pads are a little bit different. So I want to make sure to show that to you. And then you just repeat it on both sides. All right, so the last things we want to do up here before we put the wheel back on, like I said, I'm going to move to the rears next. We have our brake sensor here, which is routed back. There's the little clip back here that the cable itself has got a little grooved collar that fits into the holder. just like the little grooved collar right here. You can see where it fits in. Same thing, there's a little grooved collar here at the top. If you've pulled the other line loose, make sure to get it in. You've got the door open here. And on the inside, it's got a little groove collar as well. The plug snaps in only one direction, so plug it in until it clicks, snap the door shut, and you're all done. So the front's done. Obviously you gotta put your wheel back on, and we're gonna do the other side, but I'm gonna do that off camera. But this will show you how to do the fronts with a Brembo style front brake caliper. So now I'm gonna move to the rear, which is the more standard type, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so here we are at the back. I've already done a little bit of prep work because I wanted to make sure that this side was a little bit easier. I've already taken the bolt out for the rotor itself, so and then soaked it with WD-40 just to make sure that it was a little bit easier to get off. Again, rubber mallet is your friend if these are stuck down. Don't use a hammer. Even if you're not planning on reusing these, don't use a hammer. Don't bang on this with something metal. Okay, so the brake shoe itself, or the brake caliper itself, has this metal plate right here. It's this little spring clip. I usually will use a flat-bladed screwdriver and pry under one of the center, gently pry on one of the centers to get that to pop free, and then it'll get out. Now, it's a little hard to see, but on the back, so kind of opposite, so if you look at kind of opposite these positions right here, on the back are two rubber tubes that come out with caps in them. You take these caps out because on the inside are guide bolts, are two 8mm guide bolts, and I used a big 8mm wrench to get in on those guide bolts, so fit in that way, and then broke them free and broke them free. Once you take those guide bolts out, your brake caliper will come off. You can take your rotor off and replace it with the new one, and we're going to walk through on how to replace the brake pads. Again, don't let your brake caliper hang off the hose. That's not good for it. So take out those guide pins on the back, pull your rotor straight out, the caliper straight out away from the rotor. Then we can take the rotor off. So when we come back, I'll have the new rotor on, and we'll talk about how to get the new brake pads in and get them lubed up appropriately for this and get it put back together. Okay, so as you can see, I've got the brake caliper off. I've got the, so on the rears, forgive the background noise, I'm sitting on a bucket. So unlike the fronts that have a piston on both sides, this actually only has a piston on the inside. So one of my brake pads just fell out. As soon as that pressure is gone, it just fell out. The inside one has those clips on it. So when you look at your new ones, you'll see that one side is flat on one side has clips. The clip is still holding that side in. That's also how we're going to compress that caliper back, but not yet, not yet. So all I've done is just get this to hang up so it's not hanging off the hose, which is nice, and get that set out of the way. Now the one thing that we've got to do, so while that's easier on the rears, this carrier that sits here, we can see mine is already a little bit loose, has two 16mm bolts on the back. If you get the caliper off, it's a lot easier to get to the 16mm bolts. I couldn't get to them very easily with the caliper in place. I could get to them very easily with a long wrench to help break them free. Again, PB Blaster or WD-40 can be your friend. These bolts were a lot stiffer than the fronts, those 18s on the front for me. So I got these 16s, they're already loose, and I'm starting to work them off. So then this carrier will come off. Then you can take your rotor off. So I'm gonna get the carrier off, put the new rotor on, and then you can put the carrier right back on. And we're going to take that and we'll torque it down so we don't have to worry about that and get that set. So as soon as I put the carrier back on, I'll torque it down, tell you what the torque values are there, and we'll have our new rotor on, also torque down here, and then we'll be putting our new brake pads in, and half the car will be done. And you just have to repeat on the other side. All right, so like I said, just so you can see it for reference, here's the other brake pad. It just fits in like that. It's just a pressure fitting when it's sitting into place. Okay, so my existing one fell out, and again, because I was a little bit lower on brakes than I realized. So the inner brake pad, I've already used my seat clamp here. I've compressed against the body of the caliper itself, pressing against the the brake pad. It's not a shoe, it's a pad. So press the caliper back as far as it'll go, and then you can just walk the brake pad out. So you see, this is the brake pad that's got that clip on it that goes here on the inside. So now, once you get that out, and before you put the new ones in, again, you want to use lube on all the contact surfaces that touch on the piston itself, on the back of the brake pad, where the piston contacts, and get all that set back into place. Now, I have not put the carrier back into place yet. I'm going to do that next. So I'm going to lube all this up, and you can tell it's funny. It's nice, clean brake rotors, right? You get garbage all over them as you're doing this. So I'm going to clean all this up nicely, and you can always use brake cleaner as well. Spray all this down. It's not a bad idea to do while you're here. I actually don't have any, and my brakes really aren't that bad. This is pretty much just average road dirt, so I'm not worried about it too much. But again, if you live in a place with a lot of salt on the roads or anything else like that, use some brake cleaner, spray all this down, get it all cleaned up while you're here. You might as well, right? Now, again, lastly, as I mentioned earlier on the front rotor, make sure your rotors are in the same orientation. Mine are kind of swooping forward. Like I said, the guides say you can do it either way as long as they're consistent. Don't do some one way and the others the other direction, right? So make them all the same direction. So I took the pairs. I set the pairs that would be on this side, so the grooves are sweeping forward. I put the other pair on the other side to make sure that they're going on the correct side of the car. So I'm going to get all this cleaned up. I'm going to get my new brake pads. I'm going to get the brake pad lube or grease, and I'm going to grease all this up. And then we're also going to get the hanger back on once I hang this up properly and it's not hanging off the hose. So as you can see, the rears are actually quicker and a little bit easier than the fronts. The fronts are almost designed to make it easier to replace the brake pads, almost easier, but we're going beyond that, so we have to take the whole carriers off and do a lot more work. All right, so I'm going to do that next. I'm going to come back to you with I'll come back with the carrier back into place and torque down, and we'll get the new brake pads in, and we'll get the brake caliper on, and we're almost done. All right, so as you can see, the rotor's back on. The 16 millimeter carrier bolts are 50 Newton meters. The pins that hold the caliper in place are 28 Newton meters. So those are all torqued down. You can see there's a little bit of play left, that's right, because there's still this clip you have to put into place. So all you have to do is kind of rock it into place as it goes, and it'll hold it by tension, and make sure you get these little teeth on both sides in. See, now it's in and set, okay? So this side's all done. So the front is done, the rear is done, everything is torqued down. So let's look through this really quickly and kind of talk through it. So we've torqued down the nut that holds the rotor into place. We've torqued down the carrier bolts in the back. We've torqued down the pins that hold this rotor in place. So that's all done. So this is pretty much all done. We've done the same thing for the front. So at this point, assuming that you go in the same order, I'm doing front and rears. I'm going to do the front and rears on the other side. But at this point, you just repeat the process. Make sure that everything you've done is torqued down, is set. Don't forget little things. Like for example, on the back of where these carrier pins are, there are those little plastic caps. Make sure to put those back. That helps protect those bolts so they don't get rusty and don't become a problem to come out. And again, we look at my brake pads. Yeah, they were getting down there. They were definitely getting down there. And I don't know. So I bought my car used. I don't know if these are original. They could be. They're BMW branded. They could be originals, but they were starting to get down there. So they're starting to get low. So this is going to be an upgrade, not only just in a regular maintenance thing, but also an upgrade in my rotors themselves. So really, really positive. Good work. Okay, so I'm going to walk through. I'm going to check both my front and rear here to make sure everything is done. I'm going to repeat the work on the other side, but all in all, we're done. And if you follow these same steps, so are you. All right, so one last thing to point out here really quickly, because the passenger side rear has got one difference, right? It has the brake sensor. So the brake wear sensor. So you have two brake wear sensor cables. So you match them like to like. So if you used one for the front driver's side and you were like, this looks different, well, that's because it goes in the rear. The rear is much longer. You can see the end here where I've pulled it off the brake pad. It feeds into those clips right there and around the back and around to right there. So just take the existing one out of the clips, unplug it right there, plug the new one in, and plug it in the correct orientation into your brake pad, which is the bump to the inside. So, and then put the brake caliper back together on this side like you did the other. And then other than that difference, clean up and you're done. All right, so let's do a quick walk around and make sure everything's done. So everything is torqued down. The 18 millimeter bolts are torqued down to 50 Newton meters. The pins are in flush. That spring in the center is all set and centered. It's on and straight, so that's good to go. The nut that holds the rotor on is torqued down as well. Let's go back here to the back here really quick. And again, this is the passenger side. Got a little extra light so make sure we can see. The one thing I want to make sure to point out is our little spring here. Make sure the arms on the spring are on the outside of these bits, right? I had one that wanted to tuck underneath, which is why the brake caliper on the other side wanted to move a little bit because the spring wasn't in completely tight. So make sure that the little flanged feet are in the holes and the arms are pressing against the carrier body right there. So that's good to go. The pins on the brakes are torqued down to 28. The 16mm bolts to 50. The rotors torqued down as well. We've got the brake sensor all clipped in and good to go there all throughout. So that's all good to go here on the passenger side, which is why I wanted to show it. So when you put your wheels back on, put them back on in the air, just put them on snug and then don't torque them down until they're on the ground. It's 106 foot-pounds of torque on your lug nuts to get your wheels done, and then that will be done because there's really two things left to do. One, to get the wheels back on and obviously put the car on the ground. But then the other thing we're going to do is I'm going to show a quick video inside the car of how to reset your service for your brakes, because obviously we've got brand new brake pads all the way around and that service needs to be reset. So I'll get in the car and I'll show you how that's done, and you're all wrapped up. All right, so the last couple of things you got to do in the car that's super important. The car's not on yet. It's just active because I sat down with my keys in my pocket. Go ahead and hit start once to bring up your ignition. Now, if you have any errors on your display, make sure to clear them first. So I don't have any errors or any warnings on my display, so that's okay. So what you want to do is, first of all, pump your brakes. Super important. Do not miss this part, right? My brake pedal just went to the floor the first time. Pump it again. There's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6. All right, so now it feels normal, feels really strong. So that first time that you step on the brakes, if you did that rolling, you wouldn't stop. It would be bad. All right, so the other thing you want to do is reset. Now you've got this little button right here in the corner. No, it's dark. So you want to press and hold this button. So it's going to hold and it's going to come up with the menu to reset all of your service. So brake fluid, no. So I'm going to press the button once. Front brakes, there we go. So I'm going to press and hold. So reset, let go. Press and hold again. I'm holding, reset in progress. With the digital display, it's kind of nice. It gives you lots of additional information. Awesome. So now the front brake pads are set. I'm going to press again. Rear brake pads. Press and hold. Yes, let go. Press and hold. Reset in progress. Bang. All right. And then that's it. Reset. There's nothing else we need to do. Engine oil, brake fluid, all of that. We're good to go. All right, so that's all set. You know your brakes are reset as far as your maintenance schedule or maintenance timing, so that's great. So go ahead and make sure all your tools are put away. Take the car out for a drive. The other thing I really want to stress, brakes are safety. Be careful. Make sure you pump the brakes before you go anywhere. The other thing you're going to want to do that I'm going to do is I'm going to double check my brake fluid reservoir. Now my hood is down. Now remember, we uncapped the reservoir earlier. Make sure you've capped it again. Make sure you've capped it. So the other thing I'm going to do is I checked my brake fluid levels. They're a little bit low. It says when you have brand new brakes, your brake fluid level should be at max. So I'm going to buy a little bit because I don't have some. So I do need to get that taken care of. The other thing is, even according to BMW, and you know, it's German, so they're going to say in kilometers, they said you should drive very moderately and carefully for at least 200 kilometers without any willful aggressive braking. So if you have to brake in this emergency, do it. But if you don't, but just be really gentle as you break in your new rotors, your new brake pads, all of that set up. All of that, and we're done. All right, so all in, all the tools put away and cleaned up, car ready to go with the maintenance counters reset, and definitely reset my brakes. Now again, I just want to emphasize that again really quickly. When you first get into your car, make sure to pump the brakes a couple of times before you drive it so they get all of that contact back down onto your rotors from your new brake pads. So I'm really excited to have this in my car. I'm really excited to see the differences and continued improvements. And like I mentioned earlier, so not only is this a basic maintenance thing as your brake pads will eventually wear out, but I also look at it as a dramatic improvement. As you increase the performance of your car, you want to make sure that all of the other subsystems can keep up. And if I've got a lot more go straight, I'd love to have more ability to stop and stop effectively. Now, you never know what may happen, and it's not just out on the track, but out on the road, where you might have some challenges day to day. Thank you to R1 Concepts for making a fantastic product. I'm really excited about this, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.